so a positive that has come out of Trump has been to see that solidarity, that idea that Canada is something distinct and different and will forever be something distinct and different to the United States, despite the great relationship we've historically had.
And Andrew McDougall, the former head of communications for the Canadian Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper, joins us now. Good morning.
Morning, Kate.
I mean, the Liberals are polling ahead of the Conservatives. Do you expect that Mark Carney will be able to hold on to this expected majority?
I think he'll certainly win, Kate. That's certainly the sentiment here in Canada. Whether that's a majority or minority, we'll have to see. The polling is quite tight in a number of constituencies, but in the provinces of Ontario and Quebec, which is where most of the seats are, he has a comfortable lead. So that should translate into a government.
And that's a real turnaround, isn't it? For people who don't follow Canadian politics as closely as you do, it's a real change from how things looked just a few months ago.
Yeah, Kate. And two things happened. One, Justin Trudeau resigned at the start of January, and that's when the poll shift started. And then Donald Trump was inaugurated and went into full psycho mode. And that really rattled Canadians and got them thinking a little bit harder about the choice before them in the coming election. And a lot of Canadians are turning to Mark Carney for safety, as it looks.
How much do you put this down to Trudeau leaving, and how much do you attribute it to Donald Trump?
I'd say it's about 50-50, Kate. I really do. I think people were really tired of Justin Trudeau, and the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre, I think, have mistaken that for an endorsement of him when really it was a dissatisfaction with the status quo. And so when a different leader, and Mark Carney came along, somebody who has a great CV, and then paired that up with a US president who is quite unpredictable, that made Mark Carney an even more compelling option, even though he wears the Liberal brand.
And for people, in Canada who have been listening to Donald Trump, I mean, that is obviously a real focus now of politics for lots of Canadians. There's been this return to sort of nationalism that we maybe wouldn't expect in Canada in the way that we're currently seeing it. Do you think has that got the depth? Is that something that we're likely to see kind of solidify?
I kind of hope so, Kate, because it is, Justin Trudeau very famously called Canada post-national state. And I think the temptation for any successful multicultural country, whether that's Canada, the UK, is to forget that there is an identity, such a thing as national identity. And so a positive that has come out of Trump has been to see that solidarity, that idea that Canada is something distinct and different and will forever be something distinct and different to the United States, despite the great relationship we've historically had, despite the cultural commonalities. It is a different country, much like a Scot would look at the English and go, there's definitely a difference there. There is that latent difference, but this is a good positive expression of that nationalism. And I think that's a good thing ultimately for Canada.
And the big question, I suppose, is now, what is Canada's place in this new world? If Canada can no longer look to the US as sort of almost its protector in the same way that maybe it has in the past, where does Canada place itself now in the world order?
That's an excellent question, Kate. And I think, trade-wise, you're never going to replace the United States. It's the largest two-way trading relationship in the world across the world's longest undefended border. You don't find a new partner like that. But it is more trade with places like Europe and Canada. When I worked for the Prime Minister, successfully concluded its free trade deal with the European Union. It joined the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There are friends for Canada, and there are countries that need what Canada has to sell, particularly in the form of energy. The challenge there becomes getting that energy to market, which has been Canada's problem historically, whether under the Prime Minister I worked for or Justin Trudeau. And there, Mark Carney's got a bit of a problem because he is against resource development and will not repeal one of the key bills that blocks or would encourage the construction of things like pipelines.
And so if he were to change his stance on that could be a game changer. How likely do you think that might be?
And this is the thing, we're into an election with a leader in Mark Carney that not a lot of Canadians know. But one thing I do know about him is that he has been pushing the green agenda since leaving the Bank of England. And he has been that off for expediency in the campaign by getting rid of what he calls the consumer-facing carbon tax. But a lot of people, and many Conservatives in particular, think that he'll resuscitate that. So I wouldn't hold any great optimism, Kate, for a volte-face there on energy.
You mentioned Canada will look for new friends. I want to ask a maybe sensitive question. Have Canadians been disappointed in the UK's approach to Donald Trump and the way that Donald Trump has targeted Canada? Did people maybe expect that our Prime Minister might be more vocal in support of Canadians?
Well, I certainly was. When he met with Donald Trump, I wrote a column for the Toronto Star saying, with friends like Keir Starmer, Canada doesn't need enemies. And it's for exactly that reason. If you look at what Donald Trump reveres, one of the things he does revere, for whatever reason, is the United Kingdom, in particular the monarchy. And having things like the King or the UK Prime Minister stand up and go, well, you know what? That was actually Her Majesty's favorite realm country. And the King, the current monarch, looks at Canada quite favorably as well. And so maybe you should have a different approach there. But Keir Starmer basically backpedaled and said, "Oh, no, we agree on things. We don't disagree on Canada." And the 50, he just totally ducked that question of the 51st state, and you understand why. But this is, I think, what world leaders fail to understand with Trump is it doesn't matter what you say to him in the room. That matters not when you leave the room. He'll change his mind and do something completely opposite. So you can't, in effect, feed him in the hope that he won't come after you. He will come after you whenever he feels like it, and you can't. He's not a predictable actor. And so, getting back to the Canadian election, Kate, that this idea that one candidate or the other is better placed to handle "quote unquote" Donald Trump is just for the birds. The man cannot be handled. All you can do is prepare your country in the best way for the impacts of Donald Trump, and that's what Canadians should be going to the polls today with that in mind. Who can best make Canada the more resilient, effective, economically successful country?
Has it made Canadians question their relationship with this country?
With the UK, I
Yeah.
wouldn't say in particular. I think Canadians are broadly have always been quite positive towards the UK. I don't think that will change, but I do think we should expect to see a bit more help should Mark Carney come in, because he obviously has a deeper affinity. Well, although he's had to give up his citizenship, he's the only man who was the central bank governor of two countries, and that's Canada and the UK. So you would think, whether that's in the business community, whether in the political community, economic policymakers, that should stand Canada in good stead to have Mark Carney, someone who sat atop both, as it were.
And Mark Carney has taken a different approach to Donald Trump, certainly different to Keir Starmer. And given what you're saying about Canada sort of emerging a bit more onto the world stage, do you think it's time for Keir Starmer to take a different stance? And do you think that's something that Mark Carney will be pushing for in the future?
I would like to think so, but this is where the UK is caught between many stools. You know, they have to look to places like the US to replace what they lost in Brexit in terms of economic trade, or it forces them to look at places like China, which is not without its risks. So I think Keir Starmer is probably doing what's sensible and pragmatic. And it's not that moment, when Hugh Grant tells off the naughty US president when he comes to visit. It's not a movie, it is real life. And the United Kingdom has made some choices in the last 10 years that have limited its room to maneuver. And so that makes Keir Starmer do things that he probably wouldn't want to do, including being kind of nice to Donald Trump.
Just finally, we've talked a little bit about where Canada will be in the world. I mean, Canada has consistently not spent the 2% on defence that lots of people, lots of governments around the world have been suggesting is the very minimum. Are we going to see more spent on defence now? And I suppose thinking about Ukraine, thinking about Russia, thinking about the future for those two nations, will Canada still be 100% behind Ukraine?
Well, it will, Kate, but that's because words are free. So Mark Carney will always say the right thing, and certainly with Chrystia Freeland still in the government, you can expect her to continue championing Ukraine against Russia. But as you note, that has to be backed up by some hard assets, and Canada has long underperformed there. And I would put the government I served under that as well. We spent barely 1.4% of GDP on defense, and that has not featured in any appreciable way in the campaign, but it ought to have, because Canada, Donald Trump is not wrong there. Barack Obama came to our parliament and told us off for not spending enough money. That is true. And Canada, if it was asked to contribute in a meaningful way in a place like Ukraine, would struggle. And that's shameful for a G7 country.
Is there a push then, do you think, for more to be spent? Well, I guess if it's not featuring in the campaign, the suggestion is there isn't.
No, and it's kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Right now, it's just who can protect me from the bully. And things like the environment, defense spending have really not featured at all in this campaign. It has been a single issue campaign, and Mark Carney has handled that a bit better than Pierre Poilievre.
Well, we will see the result. Andrew, many thanks. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure, Kate.